and welcome back to another episode of Colorado Politicking. I'm Pat Poblete, a legislative reporter with Colorado Politics, and we're going to pick up this week right where we left off last time, and that was on the campaign trail. So we're going to start off with political correspondent Ernest Luning. And Ernest, since we last spoke, there have been some developments, some changes in the Republican field running to challenge U.S. Senator Michael Bennet in the 2022 election. What can you tell us and what can you update us on in terms of that field?
That's right, Pat. The field has basically doubled in the last couple of weeks. There were four candidates, including one who hasn't done very much, running against Bennet at the end of September. By the beginning of October, within a week, there were 8 candidates, and they're formidable candidates. Each of them can lay claim to a substantial lane in the primary now. We're going to see. We're going to see where it goes, but it's looking more and more like a traditional Senate primary for the party that's out of power in Colorado, with that many candidates and pretty much running the gamut of types of candidates for voters to choose from. New candidates since October 1st are Ron Hanks, who's describes himself as a warrior for Donald Trump, and he's leading with his questioning of the integrity of the 2020 election. We said last time he blew up a copying machine that was supposed to look like voting equipment in his introductory video, and he's been sending out fundraising letters telling people he wants them to report fraud in the 2021 election that's going on right now. We'll see. So some of the advice that some Republicans have given is, not to lean into that it's going to alienate unaffiliated voters. And frankly, Ron Hanks is not taking that advice. That's a major theme of his campaign. Two businessmen, basically, who own companies also got in. It's Gino Campana, who owns a multifamily home building company, large company up in Larimer County, and he's also the son of immigrants. So he's getting in, and so is Joe O'Day, who owns a big construction company in Denver. And both of them are hoping to kind of come in the way that some candidates in other states have and said, it takes a common sense business perspective in the Senate. Colorado has never elected a candidate with that background. So, we'll see what happens. Things are up in the air this year. The other candidate is Deborah Flora, who is a conservative talk radio host. She just ended her program on Sunday. So she's well known to Republicans around the state. And she's also bringing something different to the table. She says that what the primary field needs is someone who can communicate things really well to voters. And that's certainly something she's spent most of her time working on in her entire career. So we'll see where that goes too.
Now, Ernest, when we had talked about this on our last episode, you said it was probably too early to start handicapping candidates who's in the lead. And I imagine we're probably still at that point just 2 weeks later. But I'm curious, has anyone really done anything in these last couple of weeks to distinguish themselves, to kind of get at least a little bit of a nose ahead in this horse race?
We did get campaign finance reports for the most recent quarter since we last talked about this. And what those finance reports basically reveal is that there is no clear front runner at this point. Eli Bremer, who's the Olympian out of Colorado Springs, who was a party chairman down there in El Paso County, raised about $250,000, and he pulled it in from some well-known names around the country, some professional athletes, some Olympians, 2 former chairs of the USOC, as well as some elected officials, including members of Congress around the country. But $250,000 or so isn't that much for an initial quarter in a Senate race, compared to Michael Bennet raised $2 million in this quarter, and $2 million in the previous quarter. and about $2 million in the quarter before that. So there's a lot of catching up to do. And Bremer has not yet established that he's the guy to do that. The other two candidates are Eric Adland, who is he's a West Point graduate who worked in the oil and gas industry, spent some time overseas, and he's the one who became a Republican earlier this year when he decided to run for the Senate. His campaign is getting off to a start, but it turns out he hasn't really raised that much money. He's put a little over $100,000 into his campaign, which is enough. That's seed money to get things started, but he hasn't raised that much. He hasn't raised $100,000 since starting back in April. So, we'll see. We'll see where that campaign goes. Another candidate is Peter Yu, who ran for Congress in 2018 in the 2nd Congressional District. He lost that year to Joe Neguse. He's brought in a substantial sum this quarter, his first in the race, but he also put $50,000 into the race himself. So it looks like he raised more than he actually did. Neither of them have really distinguished themselves. But the thing is, there is a grassroots candidate lane in this primary, and it could be one of those two are going to be vying with Ron Hanks for the lean and mean campaign that gets it done without having to raise the big bucks.
Well, Ernest, let's go from one GOP primary where there isn't a front runner to one where there clearly is, and that's going to be the gubernatorial race. And particularly, let's talk about Heidi Ganahl. Now, there is a crowded field, Republican field here, but she's kind of distinguished herself so far, but she also got some unwelcome news on the campaign trail this week. Can you unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, she did. Heidi's definitely the front runner. She's the only Republican elected statewide in Colorado at this point. She's an at-large member of the CU Board of Regents, and that's a big distinction to take into the race. And there are a couple other candidates in the gubernatorial race. Republicans hoping to challenge Jared Polis next year, but only a couple of them have really stood out. Greg Lopez, who ran for governor 4 years ago, and Julie Clark, who's putting some money into her campaign and making some noise, but not yet really emerged to the level that Heidi has. Now, Heidi Ganahl came into the race, kind of stumbled out of the gate with a few things, but those things happen. But then last weekend, she held a discussion down in Colorado Springs at a hotel there in an auditorium with a talk radio host named Dennis Prager, who also runs PragerU, which is a nonprofit that distributes conservative brief videos, kind of giving conservative takes on things. Now, it's a little unclear why she held this thing with Dennis Prager, because he's pretty far to the right. If she's hoping to firm up her bona fides on the right, maybe that made sense for this. But what happened about a week later after the event may have jeopardized her standing in the primary. On Monday this week, Dennis got on the radio and said he was broadcasting from home because he'd had COVID since Wednesday the week before. Now, that was 3 days after he had been sitting a few feet away from Heidi Ganahl for an hour, coughing during their discussion. But it's what Dennis said after that I think really raised some eyebrows and kind of set Heidi's campaign a little bit on its ear. He said that he has been upfront for the last year and a half about trying to get COVID. Prager makes the claim that natural immunity is better than the vaccine. There aren't probably a lot of doctors who'd agree with that. But he also said that he's been taking ivermectin, which is what the horses take when they've got worms. And it's also something people take when they've got parasites. But he's also been taking hydroxychloroquine and zinc, which is something that the alternative health crowd likes to take for COVID. But the thing that doctors say is really going to protect you is the vaccine. any case, so I called up Heidi's campaign after Prager said that, and they told me that they were not aware that Dennis Prager had contracted COVID until he said it on his radio show, and they've been trying to contact trace all the folks who came to the event and let them know that they might need to go get tested. Now, Heidi Ganahl has been fully vaccinated. She wasn't showing any symptoms. And I learned yesterday that she did take a COVID test and it came back negative, so good for that. But it's not the kind of publicity you want out of the gate when you're getting your campaign off the ground.
The Ganahl campaign certainly has stepped in it a couple times, but so has her opponent or her potential opponent in a general election, Governor Jared Polis. And at this point, I want to bring in Capitol correspondent Marianne Goodland. And Marianne, I often refer to you as the Capitol's ever-present, and being ever-present kind of helped you stumble across a story on Thursday that kind of landed Polis in a little bit of hot water. So I want you to kind of speak a little bit to that.
Sure. We have this group that's called the Geographic Naming Board. It is a group that Polis appointed here about a year and a half ago. And their job is to look over requested name changes for geographic locations in Colorado. There is also a national geographic naming board out of Washington, and they work very closely together. And one of the things, one of the first recommendations that came out of the Colorado Geographic Naming Board was to change the name of Squaw Mountain in Clear Creek County to Mestahe. And we're going to show you how that's spelled across the bottom here. And this was a name that was suggested by the Northern Cheyenne. And it refers to the wife of William Bent, for whom Bent's fort is named. She was a prominent person in the Native American community. She was a Southern Cheyenne leader, and she helped negotiate trade between the groups that traded at Bent's Fort, and she maintained good relations between the white people and the Native peoples. So they wanted to change the name to Mestahe because the word squaw is considered an offensive and derogatory name to Native peoples. And the board spent some time talking about this. The board in Washington has actually had this proposal in front of them for several years now, and they kind of asked the Colorado board to move it up, get this one done. So the Colorado board sent the recommendation to Governor Polis, and this morning, Thursday morning, he showed up at the board meeting via Zoom because he wanted to talk to them about this. And he initially said that he wanted to reject the recommendation because the name is too hard to pronounce and too hard to spell. Even his staff had trouble with it, but they did recommend that he approve it, and he now seems like that is going to happen. But the comments that he made after that is what got him into hot water, not only with members of the Geographic Naming Board, but members of the public who had also tuned in for this meeting this morning. He said the name Mestahe is not in the realm of comprehension for normal readers. And the word, as you can see across the bottom here, he said dots and hyphens in the name are not normal, even for someone with a college degree. And he asked his husband, who has an English degree, to pronounce it, and he couldn't say it either. And the governor said, listen, I have to take spelling into account. If your work ends up in Washington with a name no one can pronounce, your work is not done. Well, that did not go over well with folks. State Representative Adrian Benavides, who is a member of the Geographic Naming Board, said, I would hope you'd keep an open mind about this, and asked if he would meet with the Native tribes who had made that recommendation, which the governor said he would do that. His big issue is if people can't pronounce it, they'll just go back to calling the mountain Squaw Mountain. And board member Patty Limerick, who is a historian up at CU Boulder, said, listen, this is an opportunity to teach people how to say this name. Names, this is a chance to engage with the public. Well, then the public started to weigh in, and they were not happy. They said the solution is not to make it easier to pronounce for the general public. There's ways to teach people about that. One person called Polis a white colonizer, which was pretty insulting. And she said his comments reflect that white people won't learn names rather than the people we're trying to honor and celebrate. you know, and another person said that he was trying to dumb down the population. The governor's office has been furiously backpedaling ever since. They sent me a statement that said the governor supports the recommendation and we'll keep moving forward with this. But the concern is that if the Coloradans can't say or read the names the board chooses, then they'll simply continue to call it by its original name, either Squaw Mountain or something else, and that defeats the purpose that the board is trying to work on. But this has caused some friction at a time when Governor Polis was trying to work pretty collaboratively with the native tribes. Recently, he rescinded a proclamation that was made by Governor John Evans, who was one of Colorado's territorial governors back in the 1860s. Evans had issued a proclamation that said, go out and slaughter the native peoples. And when Colorado became a state, that proclamation no longer had the effect of law, but it was still on the books. So Polis rescinded that proclamation and everybody clapped their hands and said, isn't that great? And the natives, I believe it was the Southern Utes and the Ute tribes gave him a blanket, and it was all a real nice day. This does not help him in his relationships with the indigenous people in Colorado.
So Marianne, let's spin this forward a little bit. And I have kind of two questions. One, it sounds like Polis is going to ultimately allow this to go through, right? It's going to rename the mountain. So is that the case, one? And then secondly, what are the potential ramifications here? Is this like Polis's relationship with the tribal nations is completely destroyed? Is it the other end of the spectrum where this has zero effect on that relationship? Where do we stand moving forward with that?
Moving forward, yes, the governor does support the recommendation, and it now, once he has signed off on it, it will go to the Washington-based U.S. National Geographic Naming Board for their final approval. And it's my expectation, based on the comments by their representative who participates in all these meetings, that they will approve it. What it does to him politically, that's a little hard to say right now. I've reached out to the Northern Cheyenne tribal representative who proposed the name in the first place and haven't heard back. It turns out she's out of town right now. So we are talking about a relationship that the governor has been careful to cultivate, particularly given everything that's happened with the Black Lives Matter protests, the tearing down of the Civil War Union soldier statue in front of the state capitol, and the stalling, apparently, of the placing of a statue supported by the tribes to honor the victims of the Sand Creek Massacre. That's kind of on hold right now due to some squabbling among the tribes about exactly what that statue should look like. They do have a design that was approved once, but have gone back to the drawing board a little bit on that. So I don't know if there's any real political fallout from this, but I think the governor needs to be careful. You know what the first law of holes is? When you're in one, stop digging.
Well, Marianne, thank you for your in-depth reporting on this, and to Ernest as well for keeping his ear to the ground on the campaign trail. You can see both of their work on Colorado politics, as well as some of my own occasionally, every once in a while. But until next week, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate the time.